My name is Clara Whitmore. I am 32 years old. By day, I work as a real estate advisor. Calm, meticulous, the kind of person people trust with their biggest decisions. But that's not the story I'm here to tell. The story I'm about to share is not about houses. It's about something far more personal. It's about betrayal dignity and the quiet strength that comes when you finally stop asking for permission to live your own life. I can still see them clearly, my parents, Charles and Evelyn Whitmore, the day they returned from Europe, sun-kissed, laughing, rolling their matching suitcases up the walkway to what they called our family home. They smiled as they reached the door, still talking about the meals they had enjoyed, the sights they had seen, all of it paid for with my money they said was just family sharing. My fingers tighten when I remember that. Charles fished the key from his pocket. He slid it into the lock. Nothing. He tried again. His brows furrowed. The key didn't fit. I watched from my car parked down the street. I didn't need to hear the confusion in their voices. I knew what was coming. They rattled the handle. My mother's laughter faltered. My father's face darkened. And then they saw it, taped neatly to the front door. A note. Just a few words. But they hit harder than any scream could. Surprise. A burden did this. They didn't know yet. They didn't know I had sold the house they thought was theirs. They didn't know everything inside was gone. They didn't know they had finally quietly lost. Family mocked me for failing. They took my grandmother $10,000 home, flew to Europe on my dime. I stayed silent. I sold everything behind their backs. And when they returned smiling, they found nothing waiting for them, except the truth. If someone ever told you that family is forever, let me tell you another story. Because sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the very ones who break you piece by piece until you're left standing in the ruins of who you thought you were. I used to believe in loyalty, in keeping the peace. I told myself for years that family meant forgiveness, even when it hurt. Even when they took and took until there was nothing left but the hollow shape of a person still trying to make them proud. I was that person. I grew up in a house where love was something you earned, not something you were given. My parents, Charles and Evelyn, measured affection in achievement. My sister, Veronica, she wore their approval like a crown, the perfect daughter, the success story. And I was the quiet one, the one they never really saw, unless something went wrong. The only place I ever felt safe was my grandmother's house. Henrietta Whitmore. She was different, sharp-minded, independent. She built everything she had from scratch, every brick, every dollar, every hard-earned success. She believed in me when no one else did. On weekends, I would sit with her in the old sunroom, the scent of fresh peonies filling the air as she reminded me, "Clara, you decide your worth. No one else." Her words stayed with me, long after she passed, long after her will was read. She left that house the only real home I ever knew to me. Not to my parents, not to my sister, to me. That decision one made in love set everything else in motion. They called it our family home as if those words could rewrite a legal document. They moved in without asking. They made decisions without me. And when I hesitated, they reminded me of every penny spent on my childhood, every so-called sacrifice they made. Their version of love always came with a receipt. I stayed quiet. I swallowed the resentment. I convinced myself it wasn't worth the fight. But deep down, I knew. I knew something wasn't right. And then one careless mistake shattered everything. I heard them, the words they didn't mean for me to hear, the words that ended whatever family we had left. "She's always been a burden." My father's voice, cold, flat, followed by my mother's laughter. Easy to manipulate. She still wants to belong. Give it time. That house will be ours. I remember how still the room felt when I heard it, how the air seemed to freeze. I didn't cry right away. I didn't scream. I just stood there, listening, letting it sink in. Something broke that day, but something else, something harder began to grow in its place. And that's how I stopped being their burden. When I was a little girl, I used to believe my grandmother's house was magic. It wasn't the biggest house in town. It wasn't the grandest. But to me, it was everything. Nestled behind rows of magnolia trees with white shutters that creaked softly in the wind, the house on Hawthorne Lane was the only place in the world where I felt safe, where I felt seen. My name is Clara Whitmore, and before everything unraveled, before the betrayal that would change the course of my life, I was just a quiet woman in her early 30s, working hard, minding my business, still clinging to the belief that if I just gave enough, tolerated enough, loved enough, I could earn the approval of people who never truly valued me. My grandmother Henrietta Whitmore was the exception. She was sharp as glass and twice as strong. People in our town whispered about her, a woman who'd built her own real estate empire in the 50s, in a world that never made space for women like her. But she carved her own path. And in me, she saw something I couldn't see in myself. Clara, she'd say on those golden afternoons in her garden dirt under our fingernails, people will try to tell you who you are. Don't let them. You decide your worth every single day. Those words sank into me like roots. The house was her sanctuary. Every corner held a memory, sunlight filtering through lace curtains, the scent of her peony soap, the sound of old jazz records playing softly on Sunday mornings. When she passed unexpectedly, her heart giving out while she was tending the very roses we had planted together, I thought I had lost everything. And then the will was read. She left the house to me. Not to my parents, not to my older sister Veronica, but to me, quiet, overlooked, unremarkable me. It wasn't just bricks and wood. It was the last piece of her. The physical proof that even for a moment in my life I had been chosen, valued, loved without condition. My parents, Charles and Evelyn, did not take the news gracefully. On the surface, they smiled. They spoke in polite tones at the lawyer's office. But I saw the flicker in my father's jaw, the way my mother's eyes hardened. And something inside me, something small and terrified, wondered how long their civility would last. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining things. That family meant forgiveness. That I was overthinking their casual remarks, how they started calling it our family home, how they made little decisions about the house without asking me how they treated me like a child, in the very home I legally owned. I let them move in. I told myself it was temporary, that it would bring us closer, that somehow, finally, I would belong. But as the months passed, the house that once smelled of fresh bread and garden roses, began to feel cold. My mother replaced my grandmother's paintings with cheap prints. My father rearranged the living room furniture without asking. Bit by bit, the walls that once held warmth became suffocating. Still, I stayed silent, because that's what I was taught. Family comes first. Family forgives. Family is forever. I told myself they didn't mean it when they made sharp little jokes about how I'd finally done something right by inheriting the house. I told myself it didn't matter when they invited their friends over without asking. I told myself I was overreacting when they hinted that one day the house would naturally become theirs. I swallowed every small cut, every subtle dismissal, every quiet erasure of my existence. I told myself it was love, but love, real love, does not feel like suffocation. It does not drain you dry while smiling to your face. And so the house, my sanctuary, became something else entirely. It became a stage for the slow, quiet betrayal I didn't yet have the strength to name. Not yet. But everything changes when you finally hear the truth spoken aloud. They say childhood shapes you, but mine felt more like a slow erasure. Growing up in the Whitmore household meant walking on eggshells, always careful, always quiet, always aware that at any moment the air could shift and the temperature could drop without warning. My parents, Charles and Evelyn, weren't physically abusive. They didn't need to be. Words, when used with surgical precision, can cut deeper than fists ever could. I learned early that my worth was conditional. My sister Veronica was everything they wanted: beautiful, ambitious, effortlessly charming. She won awards. She dated the right people. She smiled the right way. To them, she was the golden child, the one who made them look good, the one who made them proud. And then there was me. I was the quiet one, the awkward one, the child who didn't quite fit the mold. I wasn't exceptional. I wasn't graceful. I was just there. When Veronica brought home straight A's, they threw parties. When I brought home A's, they barely looked up from their dinner plates. When she failed, it was someone else's fault. When I stumbled, it was a reflection of who I was: lazy, ungrateful, disappointing. I can still hear my father's voice sharp and flat. Clara, not everyone's cut out for greatness. Some people just get by. And my mother, with that tight, polite smile that never reached her eyes: Veronica has always been special. We love you, of course, but well, not everyone shines the same way. It wasn't just what they said. It was how they said it. The pauses, the glances, the sighs heavy with unspoken disappointment. I stopped trying to make them proud somewhere around 16. It wasn't a decision, really. It was more like a slow acceptance, a quiet understanding that no matter what I did, I would always be the afterthought, the one who stayed in the background while the spotlight followed my sister. Veronica, to her credit, wasn't cruel. She didn't taunt me or put me down, but she also didn't see me. Not really. We lived parallel lives, hers bright and golden, mine muted and invisible. That's probably why I clung so fiercely to my grandmother. Henrietta was the only person who made me feel like I mattered. She noticed the small things: my love for books, my careful nature, the way I would spend hours organizing her dusty attic or weeding her garden without being asked. She saw me in a way my parents never could or never wanted to. Her house became my refuge, the one place where I didn't have to perform or apologize for existing. Looking back now, I realize the patterns were always there. The subtle dismissals, the way they praised me only when it benefited them, the way I was always made to feel less small or unwanted. I didn't know then that those small cracks would one day split wide open, but something inside me was already learning, already bracing for the moment when everything would finally break. If there was one person who ever made me believe I was more than what my parents saw, it was my grandmother, Henrietta Whitmore. She wasn't like anyone else in my family. Where my parents measured worth in status and appearances, Henrietta valued something quieter: resilience, kindness, and above all, independence. She was the kind of woman people underestimated, right up until the moment they realized she was 3 steps ahead of them. I still remember the first time she brought me to her house on Hawthorne Lane. I must have been 6 or 7. The moment I stepped through the creaking iron gate and onto the worn brick path, I felt it, that hum in the air, like the house itself was alive. A white colonial, its paint slightly chipped, its windows framed by ivy, and an ancient magnolia tree casting soft shadows across the porch. It wasn't perfect, but it was home. The kind of place that felt like it remembered you even after you left. The inside was just as enchanting. Worn wooden floors that creaked in all the right places. The soft smell of peony soap and old books. Her kitchen always warm, always filled with something: baking cinnamon rolls, her specialty. In every corner there was a memory waiting to be made. That house became my sanctuary. It was there that I learned to plant flowers, to bake bread, to sit in silence and just breathe. She taught me how to mend a torn sleeve, how to balance a checkbook, how to stand up for myself even if my voice shook when I did it. But more than that, she gave me something I had never known before: unconditional acceptance. She never asked me to be anything other than who I was. She didn't care that I wasn't loud or flashy or impressive. She cared that I was kind, that I tried, that I showed up. Some afternoons we would sit together in the garden, hands covered in dirt, the sun warm on our backs. She would sip her tea and tell me stories about her life, how she started with nothing, how she fought to build her business, how she refused to let the world define her. People will always have opinions, Clara, she'd say, wiping her hands on her apron. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say you did it your way. I held on to those words long after I grew up. The house with its cracked shutters and wild garden wasn't just four walls to me. It was the one place on earth where I felt seen, loved, safe. I didn't know it then, but that house and the woman who filled it with so much life would one day save me, even when she was gone. I wasn't there the day my grandmother died. I had meant to visit that weekend, but work ran late, and I told myself there would always be more time. More cups of tea, more garden walks, more of her quiet wisdom passed down between spoonfuls of cinnamon and stories of resilience. But life doesn't wait. Death doesn't either. She passed away on a crisp autumn morning alone in the very garden we had planted together. The neighbor who found her said she looked peaceful, that she still had dirt beneath her fingernails, as if even in her last moments she was tending to something growing. I remember standing in her empty living room after the funeral, the house still too quiet, as though the walls themselves were mourning. The faint scent of her peony soap still clung to the curtains. I sat in her favorite chair, tracing the worn fabric, trying to understand how the world could keep spinning without her in it. And then came the will. We gathered in the cold formal office of her attorney, a man I barely knew but who greeted me with a somber kindness. My parents sat to my left, faces carved from stone. My sister Veronica, flawless as always, sat to my right, barely masking her boredom. I already knew Henrietta had left instructions. I just didn't know how far she had gone to protect me. Her voice, though absent, filled the room as the lawyer read her words. To my granddaughter Clara Whitmore, who has shown the determination, kindness, and integrity I have admired her entire life, I leave my home at 1842 Hawthorne Lane and the sum of $25,000 to aid in her continued journey. I couldn't breathe. To my son Charles and his wife Evelyn, I leave a modest sum of $5,000 each. I heard the sharp intake of my mother's breath, saw the flicker of rage in my father's clenched jaw. Veronica shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. It was as if the air itself fractured. They tried to hide it, the forced smiles, the brittle congratulations. But I knew. I knew in that moment that something between us had shifted permanently. This wasn't just about property. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. For the first time in my life, I had been chosen. I had been seen. But deep down, some small part of me, a fragile, frightened part that still longed for their approval, knew this wouldn't end quietly. I knew them too well. I had seen how resentment simmers beneath the surface, how entitlement takes root and spreads like ivy. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I knew that one day they would come for what they believed was theirs. And when they did, I would have to choose family or freedom. It happened gradually the way they moved in. At first, it was small things. My mother Evelyn started coming over more often, bringing dishes of food I never asked for, rearranging trinkets on shelves that had belonged to my grandmother. My father Charles offered to help with minor repairs around the house, showing up unannounced with tools, letting himself in as if the locks no longer mattered. They never formally asked to move in. It just happened. One day there were overnight bags. The next there were drawers claimed, then closets, then entire rooms, until suddenly they were living there full time. I told myself it was temporary, that they were grieving too, that it would pass. But the language shifted faster than the reality. They stopped calling it Clara's house. They started calling it the family home. I remember the first time my father used the phrase. He was standing in the living room, hands on his hips, surveying the space like a king overseeing his kingdom. "We should really think about updating the flooring," he said casually. "The family home deserves better." I blinked, unsure if I had misheard. The family home, I echoed. He looked at me with that flat, dismissive expression I knew too well. Your grandmother would have wanted it. My mother chimed in without looking up from the stack of old magazines she was sorting through. We could repaint too. Maybe open up the kitchen, make it more modern. It's all outdated. Outdated. That word sank like a stone in my chest. The soft blues Henrietta had chosen, the antique fixtures, the lace curtains, all of it apparently needed to be erased. I wanted to speak, to push back, to remind them that this house wasn't theirs, that every piece of it, every memory, every brick belonged to me because it was given to me, because I was the one she trusted. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I smiled. I nodded. I told myself I was imagining things, that they were just helping. But each day something new disappeared. A vase, a framed photograph, the old throw blanket we used to curl up under on stormy nights. My grandmother's presence was being stripped from the house inch by inch, and I was too paralyzed to stop it. Worse than the physical changes were the subtle ways they undermined me. When guests came over, they introduced the house as ours. When neighbors dropped by, they spoke over me, as if I were some temporary tenant, a child visiting from out of town. I remember one afternoon standing in the doorway as my father discussed with a contractor without my knowledge plans to expand the den. My hands were shaking, my mouth dry, but still I said nothing, because deep down a part of me still wanted their approval, still wanted to belong. And so I let it happen. I let them take space they never earned. I let them rewrite the story. I let them call my home theirs. And in doing so, I started to disappear, one compromise, one silence, one swallowed objection at a time. It started over dinner. We were sitting at the old oak table in the dining room. My grandmother's table, the same one where we used to sip tea and share quiet conversations. Now it felt like foreign territory. My mother had set the table with new placemats, gaudy and bright, nothing like the soft linens Henrietta loved. The conversation drifted, as it always did, to what they wanted next. You know, my father began casually swirling his wine. Your mother and I have always dreamed of going to Europe. Paris, Venice, Rome. We never could afford it back then, not with 2 kids and all those bills. I glanced up. Fork paused midway. I already felt the turn in the air, the shift in tone. That sounds lovely, I said carefully. My mother smiled, that thin-lipped smile of hers. It would be, wouldn't it? But with the house in such good shape now, we were thinking, maybe we could use some of the equity. Just a little loan against the house. Nothing major. Just enough to finally take that trip we always talked about. I blinked. The equity? You mean, my house. Her smile didn't falter. Oh, Clara, it's the family home. There it was again. That phrase, the family home. A gentle theft, spoken sweetly. I felt my chest tighten. I'm not comfortable with that, I said softly, my voice barely audible. It's not what Grandma would have wanted. She left the house to me. I don't think taking out a loan. Don't be selfish, my father cut in sharper than before. He set down his glass with a thud. We raised you. We gave you everything we could. Your grandmother would have wanted all of us to benefit, not just you. Family shares. The word selfish sat between us like a loaded gun. I looked at my mother, searching for softness, but she just nodded, eyes glinting. We're not asking you to pay for everything, she added. We'll help where we can. But you're doing so well now. Real estate right, Grandma always said you were her smart girl. I felt the old pull in my chest, guilt duty, the desperate ache for their approval. The child inside me, the one who spent decades trying to be enough, still lived there, still hoping that this time, if I gave just a little more, they might love me the way they love Veronica. I should have said no. I should have drawn the line. But instead I heard myself say, maybe I could help with some of the expenses. Their smiles returned instantly. Victor's hiding in plain sight. Within days, the plan was set. I booked their flights, their hotels, their itinerary. Each time I typed in my credit card number, a piece of me chipped away. But I told myself it would be worth it, that this was how family worked, that giving was how you earned love. The morning they left, they barely looked back. My father kissed my cheek. My mother waved from the car. They were giddy, finally taking the trip of a lifetime. And I stood in the doorway of my own home, watching them disappear down the road, something bitter and hollow pooling deep inside my chest. I had given them everything they asked for. I just didn't know yet that it still wouldn't be enough. The weeks that followed were a blur of motion. While my parents explored the cobblestone streets of Europe, posting photo after photo of wine glasses museums and sunlit piazzas, I buried myself in work. I showed properties closed deals, smiled through meetings, and every evening I returned to a house that no longer felt like mine. Their laughter echoed from my phone screen each time I checked social media. My mother posed in front of the Eiffel Tower, red lipstick, perfect, captioned, "Finally living our dream." My father, grinning at an open-air cafe, raised his glass to the camera with the words, "Life's too short not to enjoy it." Each post twisted something deeper inside me. I told myself to be happy for them. I told myself this was family, that I was doing the right thing. But beneath the practiced smiles and polite nods, resentment began to grow, a quiet, sharp thing, like a splinter lodged too deep to remove. Every dollar spent came from my bank account. Every hotel, every meal, every train ticket. And yet not once, not one single time did they call to say thank you. Instead, the few times they did call, it was to ask for more spending money, an upgrade on their hotel, a guided tour in Florence. "It's not much," my mother would say, breezily. "And you're doing so well, Clara. We're just so proud of you." Proud. The word tasted sour. I worked 12-hour days, sometimes more, to keep up. The market was competitive, and I was chasing multiple clients while covering every cent of their once-in-a-lifetime adventure. By the time I got home each night, I was too exhausted to do anything but collapse. And still, their photos kept coming. One night around midnight, I scrolled through another batch of their updates. This time, they were in Venice, gliding through canals, arms-linked faces lit with the golden glow of lanterns. That's when the first real fracture appeared. Beneath one of the photos, someone had commented, "Such a beautiful family. Is Clara with you too?" My mother's reply was swift, almost flippant. "No, Clara prefers to stay home. She's never really been adventurous." I stared at the words until the screen blurred. It was subtle, a small thing, really, but it lodged in my heart like a cold blade. In that single sentence, she had rewritten the story, erased the truth. I wasn't absent because I chose to be. I was absent because I was the one making their dream possible. I set my phone down. My hands were shaking. That was the first time I heard the whisper in the back of my mind. Small, almost imperceptible. "They don't see you. They never have." I tried to silence it. I reminded myself this was family, that I was lucky to be in a position to help them, that they loved me, in their way. But the whisper stayed. And somewhere deep inside, I felt it, the first crack in the foundation of everything I thought I knew, the first fragile splinter of something I hadn't yet named but couldn't unfeel. Betrayal. The call wasn't supposed to change everything. It was ordinary at first. The kitchen faucet had started leaking again, the one my father had insisted on installing himself months earlier. I needed to know where he'd stored the warranty just in case I could get it fixed without another unnecessary expense. I dialed their international number, expecting a brief routine conversation. My mother answered first, her voice light distant, the sounds of clinking silverware and soft chatter in the background. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, sounding distracted, "let me pass you to your father. We're just sitting down for dinner near the Eiffel Tower." She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, as if I wasn't the one paying for the very dinner they were about to enjoy. A moment later, I heard my father's voice. Flat, irritated, the warranty. It's probably in the filing cabinet in the den. Second drawer under the folder marked kitchen. I thanked him, keeping my tone polite. Just wanted to stop the leak before it gets worse, I said. Yeah, he muttered. We're late for our reservation, talk later. The line didn't click. I waited for the dial tone ready to hang up, but instead, I heard something muffled voices, the soft shuffle of movement. They hadn't ended the call. I should have hung up. I should have pressed the button, closed my eyes, and moved on. But some terrible instinct held me there. She's just never satisfied. My father's voice came through clearer now. Always complaining about something with that house. My mother's voice followed, amused. I don't even know why Mom left it to her in the first place. We're her parents. It should have been ours. A short pause. Silverware clinked. Once we're back, my father continued. We need to talk to her about the deed. We need to make sure that house is secured for our retirement. She has no idea what she's doing with it anyway. And then the words that shattered everything I had been clinging to. She's always been a burden, he said, his voice sharp, unfeeling. The world stopped. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She's desperate for our approval, my mother added, her laughter soft, poisonous. All we have to do is make her feel guilty. She'll cave. She always does. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, the cold plastic shaking in my hands. She paid for this entire trip without blinking, my father said with a chuckle. She wants to belong so badly she doesn't even see how easy she is to control. More laughter, low, familiar, cruel. I felt something inside me splinter clean and sharp like glass, under pressure finally giving way. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the rest. Eventually the line went dead. I sat in the silence, my fingers still gripping the phone, my breathing shallow and uneven. The house around me, my house felt foreign. The air too still, the shadows too deep. In that moment, something in me died. And something else, something harder, colder, infinitely clearer, was born. I wasn't their burden. I was their prey. And I knew with absolute certainty that I could never go back to who I was before I heard those words. I don't remember how long I sat there after the call ended. Minutes, maybe hours. Time unraveled, meaningless. At first I felt nothing, not even pain, just silence. The kind of silence that wraps itself around you, cold and suffocating, until you forget how to breathe. My hands were still curled around the phone. My fingertips numb, my heartbeat so loud in my ears, it felt like it might split me in two. She's always been a burden. The words played on a loop in my mind over and over, sharp as broken glass. My own father, my own mother, voices I had trusted for most of my life, voices I had tried so hard to please. I thought of every moment I had bent myself into knots for them. Every time I had bitten back words, swallowed hurt, made myself smaller. Every time I had convinced myself that one more sacrifice, one more act of kindness would finally make me enough. It was never enough. The weight of it, years of quiet manipulation of conditional love pressed down on me, like a physical thing. My throat closed, my eyes burned. But the tears didn't come, not yet. Instead, I felt the heat rise first. The sharp, wild edge of anger blooming in my chest, so foreign it startled me. How dare they sit in some Parisian restaurant on my dime and strip me down to nothing? How dare they reduce me to a tool, a wallet, a convenience? How dare they erase me, my work, my loyalty, my love, like it was disposable? I stood without realizing it, pacing the living room, my breath coming fast and shallow. My hands trembled, clenching into fists without meaning to. The walls around me blurred, familiar but distant. Everything inside me wanted to scream, to call them back, to tell them I knew, to demand answers, apologies, something. Apologies. But then the second wave came. The fear. What if they were right? What if I really was the burden they believed me to be? What if every choice I had made, every compromise, every moment I let them take more and more was proof of my own weakness? The anger shattered into something colder, smaller. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, knees pulled to my chest. The silence wrapped tighter. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. I felt empty, like I had been hollowed out from the inside, a vessel scraped clean. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the loss of something I couldn't even name. The fragile belief that somewhere beneath all the dysfunction there had been love. That family, for all its flaws, had still meant something real. That belief was gone. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the floorboards Henrietta and I had polished together so many years before. The house felt different now, colder, heavier, stripped of the safety it once offered. Even the air smelled sharper metallic. I finally moved when the first shard of resolve began to take shape. It was faint at first, almost too quiet to notice. But it was there, a whisper of something new. Enough. I wasn't ready to act. Not yet. The shock still clung to my skin. But somewhere deep beneath the numbness, something was stirring. A line I hadn't known existed had been crossed. And once crossed, there was no going back. I stood my legs unsteady and walked to the window. Outside the garden, Henrietta and I had once tended lay in shadows, the flowers overgrown wild, untamed. For the first time in my life, I understood something simple and terrifying. Sometimes the people who raise you are not the people who love you. And sometimes the only way to survive is to let the old version of yourself die. That night, I went to bed without turning on the lights. And in the dark, I made a promise I didn't yet know how to keep. Never again. The next morning, I woke with a single thought: I needed to take back control. The numbness was still there, lingering beneath my skin, but the sharp edges of anger had dulled into something clearer: resolve. For the first time in years, I saw my situation for what it truly was. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't family tension. This was manipulation, exploitation, abuse dressed in politeness. And I wasn't going to let it continue. I made 3 calls that day. The first was to Sophie Lang. Sophie and I had met years ago in college, long before she became one of the sharpest family law attorneys in the city. She was brilliant, precise, calm, ruthless when necessary. We hadn't spoken in months, but the moment she heard the shake in my voice, she cleared her schedule. We met at a quiet cafe near her office. I told her everything about the house, the inheritance, the manipulation, and most of all, the call I couldn't unhear. Sophie didn't blink. "Legally, the house is yours," she said, folding her hands over her coffee cup. "They have no claim, no shared ownership, no rights no matter what they tell you." "What you're describing, Clara, it's classic financial manipulation. And you're under no obligation to let it continue." Her words felt like oxygen. "Could they sue?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She gave a small, almost pitying smile. "They could try, but they'd lose." The second call was to Marcus Lee. Marcus was one of the top real estate brokers at my firm, known for handling sensitive, high-value transactions with discretion. When I asked if we could meet in person, he didn't hesitate. We sat in his office, surrounded by polished wood and floor-to-ceiling windows. I kept my explanation brief, but honest. I needed the house sold, quietly, quickly, no public listings, no open houses, no noise. He raised an eyebrow. "Running from the law?" he teased gently. I managed the faintest smile. "Family situation." He nodded, face softening. "Say no more. I'll handle it. But for a private off-market sale, you'll probably take a hit on the price." "That's fine," I said without flinching. I just want it done. The third call was the hardest. Julia Alvarez had been my closest friend in high school, a fierce bright light who refused to shrink for anyone. Life had pulled us in different directions. She went into private investigation, and I faded into the quiet life I thought I wanted. When I called her, she answered on the second ring. "Clara, is that really you?" I felt something twist in my chest. "Yeah," I said softly. I need help." We met that evening in a small park where we used to waste away summer afternoons as teenagers. I told her everything. For the first time, I said it all out loud. Every manipulation, every tiny theft of dignity, every buried betrayal I had tried so hard not to see. Julia didn't interrupt. She just listened, her eyes sharp, her expression darkening as the story unfolded. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. Clara, you should have called me years ago. She offered something I hadn't even thought to ask for: background checks, financial history, old public records. Let's find out how deep this goes, she said, because something tells me this isn't the first time they've done this to you. For the first time in weeks, I felt something unfamiliar: steadiness. I wasn't alone. Sophie gave me the law. Marcus gave me a way out. Julia gave me truth. Piece by piece, the plan began to take shape. Quiet, precise, careful. I wasn't going to confront them yet. Not in anger, not in fear. No, this had to be on my terms. I had spent my entire life being reactive, apologizing, shrinking, accommodating. But this time I would move first, and I would move in silence. The hardest part wasn't the decision, it was the quiet. The days leading up to the sale felt oddly calm, almost surreal. I moved through them with mechanical precision, checking off lists, signing documents, boxing up my life one memory at a time. Each object held weight. Every photograph, every chipped mug, every worn book carried echoes of who I used to be. I packed it all. I sorted everything into categories. The things that were mine, the things that belonged to them, the things that belonged to her Henrietta, who in some way was still guiding me through all of this. The house felt emptier with every passing day. Rooms that once smelled of cinnamon and fresh flowers stood hollow, stripped of warmth. The sound of my footsteps on the bare floors was sharp, unfamiliar. I found myself whispering small apologies to the walls, to the ghost of my grandmother, to the girl I used to be. I wasn't angry anymore. Something inside me had settled, cold, steady, determined. Marcus handled the logistics with surgical efficiency. The private sale closed faster than I thought possible. The buyer never saw my face. The money transferred quietly. No public records, no noise. By the morning of the final move, everything was in place. My belongings were already at the temporary apartment I'd rented 2 hours away. My parents' things were carefully boxed, labeled, and sent to the storage unit I'd secured for them 6 months prepaid, one last courtesy I knew they'd never appreciate. The house, stripped of its clutter, stood still beneath the soft gray light of dawn. I walked through each room one last time. The living room where I used to read beside Henrietta on stormy nights. The kitchen where we baked bread and shared secrets. The garden, visible through the back window, overgrown but still alive. When I reached the front hallway, I pulled the small folded note from my pocket. I placed it gently on the marble console table, right where I knew their eyes would land the moment they stepped through the door. Surprise. A burden did this. 8 words. Simple, clean. The final punctuation on a story that had stretched far too long. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence settle around me. My hands were steady. My heart for once was quiet. I locked the door behind me, slid the keys through the mail slot, and walked away. I didn't look back. Not at the house. Not at the memories. Not at the version of me who had spent her entire life waiting for permission to take up space. The sun was just beginning to rise as I drove toward the freeway, the sky painted in soft pinks and golds. And for the first time in years, I felt weightless. Not free yet, not entirely, but close. Close enough to begin. They came back on a Sunday. I knew the exact flight, the exact time. I even knew the car service they would take from the airport. My mother always preferred black sedans with tinted windows, said it made her feel important. I didn't need to be there to see it unfold, but I imagined it anyway, vividly, clearly. As I sat in my new apartment 2 hours away, the last of the evening light slipping through the blinds, I pictured their smiles first, The relaxed glow of two people returning from the trip of a lifetime, their bags heavy with souvenirs, their minds filled with stories. They couldn't wait to tell stories bought with money that wasn't theirs. I could almost hear my father's easy laugh, my mother's exaggerated sigh of contentment. They would pull into the driveway, still talking, still buzzing from the last leg of their journey. And then confusion. The key wouldn't turn. I imagined the pause, the frowns, the subtle shift as the weight of reality began to sink in. My father always quick to anger, rattling the doorknob. My mother nervously suggesting maybe something was wrong with the lock. And then their eyes would land on the note, that small folded square of paper resting just inside the glass. Surprise. A burden did this. I wondered who read it first, if they read it together, if the words made sense immediately, or if the meaning had to claw its way through denial before it struck. The house would have been silent, empty, no furniture, no photographs, no trace of the life they thought they owned. I didn't need to imagine their faces. I knew them too well. I knew exactly how my mother's eyes would widen in disbelief, how her mouth would open, stunned and wordless. I knew how my father's face would darken, how he would shift from confusion to outrage in the space of a single breath. And I knew most of all that beneath the shock, beneath the fury, there would be something else: humiliation. The one thing they feared most. I didn't check my phone when the first calls started coming. I didn't check when the messages turned frantic. I didn't check when the emails flooded in, each one angrier than the last. I let it all pile up, unread, untouched, like the wreckage of a storm I no longer needed to survive. Because the truth was simple. The house was gone. The game was over. And for the first time in my life, I was the one who had moved first. I exhaled slowly, my fingertips resting lightly on the window frame as the last light faded from the sky. There was no satisfaction in it, no gloating, just stillness. They had returned to nothing, and somehow in losing everything I had finally found myself. The last person I expected to hear from was Veronica. The text came 3 days after the fallout. Simple, unassuming, just 6 words. Can we talk? Just us, please. I stared at the message for a long time. My first instinct was to ignore it. We had never been close, not as children, not as adults. Veronica was always the shining one, the golden daughter who could do no wrong, the one they paraded around like a trophy while I stood quietly in the shadows. But something in the wording, something fragile, made me pause. We met at a small cafe halfway between our cities. Neutral ground. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked tired, hollow. The same carefully styled hair, the same flawless makeup, but her eyes were different. Worn. For the first few minutes, we sat in awkward silence, stirring our coffee, the space between us, thick with years of unsaid things. And then softly, she began. "They did it to me too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked up, startled. What Veronica's fingers fidgeted with the rim of her cup. Years ago, before I got married, they took out credit cards in my name. I didn't find out until collection agencies started calling. When I confronted them, they acted like it was nothing, said it was for the family, that I owed them after everything they'd done for me. I felt the breath catch in my throat. I paid it off, she continued, quietly, because I didn't want to cause a scene, and because I thought that's just what family meant, giving until you couldn't give anymore. Her eyes finally met mine. And then I saw what they did to you. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of her confession settled between us, years of separate pains suddenly stitched together by shared truth. "I'm sorry, Clara," she said softly. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have stood up for you." The words, unexpected, genuine, landed deeper than I expected. I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but something gentler. Something that steadied me. "I don't hate you," I said quietly. I never did. She smiled, small and sad. I hated me for a long time. We sat there a little longer, letting the silence stretch, not uncomfortable this time, but full of quiet understanding. Before we left, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, "for walking away." The words hit me harder than anything else had. Pride, not obligation, not manipulation, just simple human pride. I left the cafe that day lighter somehow. The damage they caused was still there etched deep, but I wasn't alone in it anymore. And for the first time in my life, I let the possibility in. Maybe I never had been. We met at a small cafe downtown. Neutral ground, public, safe. I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. I wanted to set the tone. When I walked in, I spotted them immediately. Charles and Evelyn seated at a corner table, their expressions already twisted with barely contained frustration. I took my time crossing the room. Robert, Evelyn. I greeted them deliberately using their first names, a small calculated distance. My mother flinched. My father's jaw tightened. I sat down slowly, placing my phone face up on the table between us. They noticed. "Is that really necessary?" My mother asked, her voice brittle. "It's habit," I said evenly. I record all my important meetings now. I could see it, the flicker of confusion, the unease. They weren't used to this version of me, the one who didn't shrink. "What you did was cruel," my father said, his voice low but sharp. "Selling the house, locking us out. After everything we've done for you, I didn't blink. The house was mine. It was always mine." He scoffed. My mother's eyes were already glassy with tears, the kind of practiced sadness I knew too well. "We're your parents," she whispered. "Family doesn't do this to each other." I tilted my head slightly. I agree. Family doesn't. The words hung there, simple, sharp. "We raised you." My father pressed his tone, rising. "Without us, you'd have nothing." I didn't flinch. Without you, I wouldn't have spent 3 decades doubting my own worth. For a brief moment, they were silent. I could almost see the calculation behind their eyes, searching for the next angle, the next guilt trip, the next manipulation. "We're willing to move past this," my mother finally said, her voice soft, trembling. "If you just take the proceeds from the sale and help us find a new place, something we can all share, this doesn't have to destroy the family." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I kept my voice calm. "There is no family to destroy. There's just a long history of you taking and me giving. That ends today." My father's face darkened. "You're going to regret this." I met his stare without blinking. "No, I won't." I let the silence stretch deliberately. Let them sit in the discomfort they had spent years avoiding. Then I stood. "Your belongings are in storage. 6 months prepaid. The access code was emailed to you." I slid a folded piece of paper across the table, backup instructions. Cold, precise. My mother's tears finally broke, but I felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, just distance. "You're not the victim here," I said quietly. "Not this time." Without another word, I turned and walked out. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I let them speak first. We sat in that corner booth, 3 people who shared blood but nothing else, while they fumbled through rehearsed outrage. My father's voice sharp, my mother's eyes glassy with well-practiced tears. Words tumbled: betrayal, ungrateful family. I stayed silent. I let it all wash over me, unbothered, until they finally ran out of steam. Then I reached for my phone. Without a word, I pressed play. Their voices filled the space between us, clear, undeniable. My father. "She's always been a burden." My mother. "She still wants our approval. She'll cave. She always does." I watched the blood drain from their faces. When the recording ended, I set the phone down gently. The cafe around us buzzed with quiet conversation, unaware of the quiet implosion happening at our table. My voice, when I finally spoke, was calm, steady, detached. "This is who you are," I said, "and this is the last time you will ever hold anything over me." My mother's hands trembled. "Clara, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We were just upset, stressed. We didn't mean any of that. You misunderstood." I shook my head. "No, I didn't." "And you didn't just say it once?" "This wasn't an accident. This was who you've always been. You've been using me for years. And I let you." My father leaned forward, his eyes cold. "You can't erase us." I met his gaze without flinching. "I don't need to erase you. I just need to walk away." I laid it out simply, no drama, no raised voice. Clear boundaries like Sophie had taught me. "I won't give you another cent. I won't share my address. I won't answer your calls. If you show up at my office or at my home, I will pursue legal action. This is over." My mother's tears spilled freely now. "Clara, we're your parents," she whispered. "We made mistakes, but we're still family. Please don't do this." The word family struck me strangely, like an echo from another life. "Family," I said softly, "isn't supposed to feel like this." My father's mask cracked for a moment. I saw something flicker, anger, maybe even fear, but it was too late. I stood gathering my coat. "Your belongings are in storage. 6 months prepaid. The details are on the paper I left." I placed a small folded note on the table between them. Calm, deliberate. Neither of them moved to touch it. "We can fix this," my mother choked out. "You don't have to end it like this." I paused, just for a breath. "It ended a long time ago," I said quietly. "I'm just the first one willing to admit it." And with that, I left. I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. I moved to the coast 2 months later. A small town by the water, far enough from the city, far enough from the memories, but close enough to still feel like I existed in the world. The house I bought wasn't grand. It wasn't historic. It didn't have ivy-covered walls or the scent of peonies drifting through the air. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I decorated a home without asking anyone's opinion. I chose bright colors. I filled the rooms with soft light and mismatched furniture that made me smile. Every corner carried something of me, books I loved, art I'd collected over the years but never displayed. No more inherited shadows, no more walking on eggshells. I also found myself drawn to something I hadn't expected, helping others who had walked roads like mine. The workshop started small, just an idea over coffee with Julia one afternoon. We talked about how many women we knew, quiet, capable, and yet endlessly manipulated by people who claimed to love them. Financial control, gaslighting, silent, invisible abuse no one wanted to name. So we named it. We called the workshop Foundations. It wasn't just about real estate or money. It was about autonomy, about teaching women how to understand their rights, their power, their choices, about giving them the tools to draw lines in the sand before they found themselves stripped of everything the way I once had been. The first session had 12 women, the second 30. I stood at the front of those rooms, my voice steady, my heart open, telling the story I had once been too ashamed to say out loud. I watched faces light up when they realized they weren't alone. I watched the weight lift from their shoulders as they saw, maybe for the first time, that they were allowed to say no, allowed to keep something for themselves. I built something piece by piece. Not just a new home, not just a new life, a new version of me. Some nights I still thought about the old house, about Henrietta. I hoped somewhere she would have been proud. I hoped she would have understood why I had to walk away, that I wasn't abandoning her memory. I was honoring it. Because love, the kind she showed me, was never about control. It was never about obligation. It was about freedom. I walk the beach most evenings now. The wind in my hair, the sound of the tide steady beneath my feet. It reminded me that everything in life moves. Everything changes. And sometimes to survive, you have to let go of the very things you once believed you couldn't live without. I had lost them. My parents. that house, the version of me who never spoke up. But in their place, I had found something better, myself. Some mornings, the light on the water catches just right, soft, golden, endless. It's become my favorite part of the day. I wake early before the world stirs and walk the narrow stretch of beach just beyond my new home. The air is sharp, salty, clean. The kind of air that fills your lungs in a way that makes you feel alive. I never thought peace could feel like this. A few weeks after the move, I reconnected with someone I hadn't seen in years, Melanie Cruz. We'd gone to high school together. Back then, we were little more than acquaintances, two girls orbiting different circles. But when she heard I had moved to the coast, she reached out through a mutual friend. We met for coffee, tentative at first, but within minutes, something warm and familiar settled between us. Melanie had rebuilt her life too, divorced, starting fresh. There was something in her eyes I recognized instantly, the quiet resilience of someone who had survived disappointment, who had let go of what broke her, and chose herself instead. Through Melanie, I met others. A community of women different in stories but the same in spirit, each of us carrying invisible scars, each of us building something new from the wreckage of what once was. We gathered for bonfires, weekend hikes, lazy Sunday brunches where laughter replaced apologies. For the first time, I belonged somewhere without needing to earn it. One morning, standing barefoot in the cool sand, I felt the sun rise over the horizon. The sky lit in soft pastels, pink, amber, pale gold. The water stretched out before me, vast and limitless. The tide pulled in gentle but steady. I closed my eyes and breathed. I wasn't the same person who had stood on the porch of that old house, waiting for someone to love her enough to stay. I wasn't the girl who bent herself into pieces to keep the peace. That version of me, the one who mistook silence for loyalty, was gone. In her place stood someone whole. I still carried the memories, the hard ones, the beautiful ones, but they didn't own me anymore. And I carried something else too, something I never thought I'd find. Hope, not the fragile, desperate kind, but the quiet, steady kind that roots itself deep and holds fast even when the wind changes. The light on the water shifted as the sun rose higher. I smiled. I was still here. I was still standing. And I was finally free. I went back to see her 1 year later. The cemetery was quiet that morning. The sun had barely crested the horizon, casting soft golden light across the marble headstones. The air smelled faintly of salt from the distant sea, and the grass beneath my feet was still wet with dew. I carried a small bouquet of pink peonies, her favorite. I knelt down, brushing a few leaves from the smooth stone that bore her name, Henrietta Whitmore, beloved mother, grandmother, friend. For a long moment, I just sat there in silence, my fingers resting gently on the carved letters. The wind moved softly through the trees, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't carrying weight in my chest. I closed my eyes. "Hi, Grandma," I whispered. My voice barely broke the stillness, but somehow it felt like she was listening. I didn't have to speak loudly. She'd always heard me, always seen me, even when no one else did. "I think I finally understand," I murmured. "Why you did what you did, why you left the house to me. It wasn't about the house, was it? It was about teaching me how to stand." I smiled softly to myself, brushing a tear from my cheek. It took me longer than I'd like to admit, but I got there. "I think you'd be proud." The wind shifted gentle, almost playful the way it used to sound when we worked side by side in her garden. I told her everything then about the sale, about the confrontation, about the quiet life I'd built by the sea, about the workshop, the new friends, the quiet mornings where I finally felt peaceful. And then I told her the truth. I hadn't even said aloud until that moment. "I don't hate them," I whispered. "I don't think I ever really could. But I had to walk away. I had to stop letting them decide who I am." My fingers traced the smooth curve of the stone. The flowers swayed gently beside me. "Thank you," I said softly, "for loving me when I didn't know how to love myself, for showing me that I was allowed to choose peace." I sat there until the sun climbed higher, until the air warmed, and when I stood, I felt it lightness. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of something greater acceptance. As I walked back to my car, I thought of every person still trapped in the shadows I had left behind, the ones still waiting for permission to choose themselves. To them, I would say, you don't need anyone's permission. You can walk away. You can begin again. And sometimes the greatest act of love is choosing to save yourself. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever carried the weight of someone else's expectations, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if you're ready to start over, know this: you are not alone. Thank you for listening. It took me a long time to understand that sometimes the thing we need to let go of is the expectation that the people who hurt us will ever change. I think I held on to that hope longer than I even realized. Somewhere deep inside, there was always a part of me, a small, fragile sliver, that kept waiting for them to see me, to choose me, to become the parents I needed them to be. But they never did. And on that morning, standing at my grandmother's grave with the wind brushing against my face and the sun rising over the hills, I finally stopped waiting. I laid the last of the peonies down on the soft grass and whispered words I never thought I'd find the strength to say. "I forgive you, but I'm done." I wasn't forgiving their actions. I wasn't excusing the years of manipulation or the cold edges of their conditional love. I was forgiving myself for staying too long, for breaking myself into pieces just to fit into a family that was never capable of holding me gently. The truth is, some people are not meant to be part of our future, even if they were part of our beginning. And that's okay. I left the cemetery lighter than I arrived. Not free of pain, because I don't think that kind of hurt ever fully disappears, but free of the weight I'd been dragging behind me for decades. That afternoon, back in the coastal town I now called home, I joined a group of women for a community potluck. Some were old friends, some were new faces. All of them carried stories, some of heartbreak, some of healing, but every one of them stood taller because they had chosen themselves. We laughed. We shared food and memories and quiet promises of brighter days ahead. And somewhere between the laughter and the salty breeze, I realized that I had found family not through blood, but through choice. That is the legacy I carry now. Not the house, not the scars, but the knowledge that life doesn't end when we walk away from people who were supposed to love us. Sometimes that's when it actually begins. So before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee in your hands? Or maybe it's the middle of the night and stories like this are keeping you company when the world feels still. Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one with gratitude, and I promise your words matter here. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to this channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Wherever you are right now, whatever season you're standing in, I hope you carry this story with you. Not as a wound, but as a quiet reminder that it is never too late to start over, never too late to choose yourself. And remember, sometimes the miracle you've been waiting for doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly, patiently, until the moment you're ready to open your heart and let it in. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.